Hello. First, thank you for inviting me to participate in the RX Hope webinar series. Today I'm here to answer some frequently asked questions related to clinical trial participation for kids with rare diseases like SCN2A. My name is Carolyn McMicken. I am currently a Director of Medical Science Liaisons, also known as MSLs, and I am supporting our epilepsy clinical development programs. Neurocrine Biosciences is a neuroscience-focused biopharmaceutical company with 28 years of experience discovering and developing life-changing treatments for people with serious, challenging, and under-addressed neurological, endocrine, and psychiatric disorders. At Neurocrine Biosciences, we pride ourselves in having a strong, inclusive, and positive culture based on our shared mission and values. Our purpose is to relieve patients' suffering and enhance lives. Our mission is grounded in neuroscience with unique expertise in neurology, neuroendocrinology, and neuropsychiatry. We remain focused on discovering novel treatments for conditions with significant clinical need, and we do this with passion. The company's diverse portfolio includes several FDA-approved treatments with 3 pivotal and 5 mid-stage clinical programs in multiple therapeutic areas. Headquartered in San Diego, Neurocrine Biosciences specializes in treating and interrupting disease-causing mechanisms involving the interconnected pathways of the nervous and endocrine systems. Our epilepsy programs are listed at the bottom of this slide. I hope that you found this brief introduction helpful. I know that you have lots of questions about clinical trial participation for kids with rare disease. So let's jump in.
Hi, I'm Jenny Burke. I'm a member of the Family's SCN2A Foundation Board of Directors, and I'm here to interview Carolyn today and talk about clinical trial readiness.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I guess I'll just jump right into the questions then. So how do clinical trials work for the pediatric population?
Well, the first thing I want to say is that the same ethical and good practice guidelines apply in the standards to adults as well as children. So we try to maintain the highest standards regardless of who the patient is that is participating in a clinical trial. There is a major difference when it comes to the role of the parent, though. So because children are minors, any clinical trial participation for a child would require parental consent. And that is part of the process where the parent learns exactly what their child is being asked to do, and they make a decision whether they want to agree to participate. In some cases, the child still is asked to provide what they call assent, saying they agree to cooperate. And in other cases, if the child is unable and the parent just gives their own consent.
That's great. And so does a pharmaceutical company actually run the clinical trial, or do they contract through another company? And if so, why does that happen?
So it depends on the study, as well as a couple of other factors. It is commonplace for pharmaceutical companies to employ a contract research organization, also known as a CRO, to manage various aspects of the clinical trial. So while the sponsor or the pharmaceutical company that is putting on the clinical trial is very closely involved with the study, there may be different aspects that the CRO is more directly involved with. So that could be creating study documents, contracting with other vendors that are involved. So if anybody has ever participated in a clinical trial, these can include the lab that some of the tests are sent to. In the case of pediatric epilepsy or epilepsy studies, it could involve an EEG vendor. There's kind of concierge travel service vendors. So all of those are typically managed through a contract research organization. But a lot of the aspects are still retained by the sponsor of the study as well. Certainly the safety and general oversight of the study.
That makes sense. Can you talk a little bit about the ethics behind randomized trials for really sick kids?
Again, the standards in terms of ethical practices are very important, and there's lots of efforts to protect vulnerable patients. And of course, for really sick kids, these are vulnerable patients. And some of these efforts might include, or do include, putting together really a full rationale for why the treatment is acceptable to test in a child who is sick. So that includes the preclinical, what they call preclinical. So that's doing testing on animal safety, doing testing in the lab, and then clinical package might include first trying the medication safety on a healthy adult. And then based on all of that is when you would decide whether it's potentially safe to test the treatment in children. And there's also attempts to limit exposure to that investigational treatment. So this is why you might see some very small studies, so they don't have a whole lot of participants, especially earlier on. You also will see that we try to keep studies, the duration appropriate to get the information that's required, but not unnecessarily expose somebody to that treatment. And then there's also a lot of considerations around dosing and a whole lot of work that goes on before a medication actually gets to a treatment in a patient population. And then investigational drugs in really sick people are typically introduced as add-on treatments. So while the FDA may require a placebo control arm of the study, so an arm where there's not the active investigational treatment, in those situations, the placebo arm participants are continuing what they call treatment as usual. So they are on some kind of medication or what the standard of care is considered. They're just not getting that add-on investigational treatment.
Can you talk a little bit about the federal guidelines around industry engaging directly with patients? Are there red flags we should look for? What about data collection and privacy and recruiting patients?
Sure. So over the past several years, the FDA has drafted guidance related to this. There's been a lot of recognition, particularly in rare diseases, that the voice of the patient and or caregiver is critical in all stages of the clinical development process. So there's kind of, to take a step back, there's two defined roles. So we have the kind of study participant role that we're talking more about now, and they're the individuals who are or become part of an investigational study. And then there's also what we call patient advisors. So there are opportunities, lots of them, for patients or advocates to participate in informing how we're going to design a clinical trial. And so all of this is very appropriate and also regulated. So there are requirements in terms of confidentiality, as well as protection of HIPAA, is the same way that would be with your doctor.
So here's a question. If someone participates in a gene-altering trial, are they only able to participate in that one? Would they ever be able to do another gene-altering trial if that one didn't work or didn't work fully, for instance?
So every trial is different, and I'm sure your group knows, but a great resource is clinicaltrials.gov. And of course, speaking with your physician about what's available. So some of them you might find that they have a restriction around other treatments. Others may say a certain amount of time. I was just looking at some of the requirements for upcoming vaccine trials. I was curious about that myself, and In one instance, it said 2 years that you would be kind of part of this group. So it really, every situation is different.
So you may know we're developing a clinical trial readiness study at the Family's SCN2A Foundation. Is that data that industry will actually be able to use, or are they going to have to do their own study to get their own data?
Well, it's a stepwise process. So there's opportunities to apply learnings from something like the clinical trial readiness study. It's very critical and important to understand the condition that you're trying to treat on many levels. So this will give information to people who are developing treatments. It can inform the development of the study design, what you're trying to measure, and maybe give clues into where you might be able to be successful. And there are additional steps and regulatory requirements for industry trials. So, there might be something that's used in a clinical trial readiness study, a survey, or some kind of measure that's used, but the FDA could require further research and validation of different measures before it would be acceptable, say, in a clinical trial as an endpoint or proof of efficacy.
Well, thank you very much. That's the end of my questions. Unless you have any other comments, we really appreciate your time.
I would like to say that I really enjoyed having this opportunity, and I'm happy to answer other questions or follow up that might come from this trial, and look forward to engaging more with the Family's SCN2A.
Thank you very much, Carolyn.